In today's episode, the conclusion of the United States. The crisis of Ukrainian armed forces is in full swing. The Russian army has launched a counteroffensive. Hamas is innocent. The Israeli army bombed a Christian Baptist hospital in Gaza. 4 Conop Witches in Ukraine performed an initiation rite with a little girl. Propagandists keep exploiting socially vulnerable groups, including children, to create fake news. Our analytical team at Detector Media is on constant watch, tracking the spread of the boldest fakes from Kremlin propaganda. I'm Vadym Miskyi, and for the next 10 minutes, I'll guide you through the key facts. Let's get started. The crisis in the Ukrainian armed forces is in full swing. The Russian army has launched a counteroffensive. This fake has been spread by Kremlin propagandists, citing the US presidential advisor. However, in fact, Jake Sullivan discussed the need for military assistance to Ukraine, not the military achievements of the Russian invaders.
How close to crisis are we on that front?
We can continue to sustain deliveries of critical ammunition for them to defend against that Russian offensive and continue pressing forward in other areas in Ukraine. And you're right, Margaret, that Russian offensive is very much underway. The Russians are throwing a lot at the Ukrainians in the northeast and the east. And we need to make sure that we continue rushing necessary military supplies to them. We're doing that. But we need Congress to act. And the president has made clear that he is going to go to Congress with a package of funding for Ukraine, as well as continued support for Israel.
The Russian dictator calls the transfer of long-range ATACMS missiles to Ukraine a mistake.
Но если война проиграна России, зачем поставлять ATACMS? Пусть заберут назад ATACMS, все другое вооружение, садится за блины, приезжает к нам на чаепитие. Если проиграна война, ну о чем мы говорим тогда? Зачем ATACMS?
Наші домовленості з президентом Байденом виконуються дуже влучно. Атакамси себе показали. Слава Україні!
The United States has sent Ukraine about 20 ATACMS missiles, the New York Times reports. One of the conditions for its delivery is that they are not to be used for attacks on Russian territory.
Well, I'm not going to preview any future security packages that we are putting together for the Ukrainians. It's something that, we're regularly consulting with the Ukrainians on what they need, but I'm just not going to preview anything that might be included in future packages. And in terms of where they're sourced from, I'm just not going to get into that at this time.
On the night of October 17, Ukraine launched a strike on airfields in occupied Berdyansk and Luhansk, which were used by Russian aircraft. Russian so-called military bloggers called this strike one of the most significant in the entire war. The Israeli army bombed a Christian Baptist hospital in Gaza. This fake has been spread by Russian propaganda.
События, которые происходили и продолжают еще происходить в секторе Газа, они, конечно, потрясают своей жестокостью, безразличием мирового сообщества к этому. Самое главное, знаете, страх, такой тотальный страх, сказать, что виноват в этом Израиль, что виноваты в этом американцы, которые сейчас завезли эти практически тонны, весом в тонну планирующие бомбы.
Joe Biden stated that he was familiar with the data from the US Department of Defense. The conclusion is that the Palestinian militants, not Israel, are to blame for the devastating attack on the hospital in the city of Gaza.
But the fact is that Israel, as they respond to these attacks, it seems to me that they have to continue to ensure that you have what you need to defend yourselves. And we're going to make sure that occurs, as you know. And we have to also bear in mind that Hamas does not represent all the Palestinian people. And it has brought them only suffering. Years ago, I asked the Secretary of State when he and I were working in the Senate to write something for me, and he said, he wrote a line that I think is appropriate. He said, it's not, we lead, not just, well, I won't go into it, I'll wait later, taking too much time, but the point is this, that I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you.
We see that support and your steadfast commitment to provide Israel with the tools we need to defend ourselves. We see that support in the clear message you've sent our enemies not to test our resolve, and in the 2 American carrier battle groups that you sent to the region to back up those words with action. But above all, Mr. President, the world sees that support and the moral clarity that you have demonstrated from the moment Israel was attacked. You've rightly drawn a clear line between the forces of civilization and the forces of barbarism. You describe what Hamas did as sheer evil. It is exactly that.
The Pentagon emphasized that Hamas terrorists use civilians as human shields.
It should be very clear that Hamas is the one putting Palestinians or those in Gaza at great risk. I mean, they are putting their command and control units inside hospitals, inside areas where there are innocent civilians. So the fact that they've set up command centers at these hospitals just shows the brutality that they're willing to engage on, that they're willing to use civilians as a way to mask their operations, but also to see them as casualties. That's not how we democracies are going to, or how the secretary in his conversations with Minister Gallant, we have always emphasized that the law of war be upheld.
The Israeli Army Press Service released a video showing that the explosion in a hospital in the Gaza Strip was caused by a rocket fired from a nearby building. Bild has also collected evidence that the hospital in Gaza was hit by the militants. This is a broadcast by Al Jazeera, which showed that the launches of rockets from Gaza into Israel at 6:59 p.m. on October 17, the failure of one of the projectiles and a powerful explosion on the ground. These are satellite images which clearly show that it was not the hospital building that was damaged by the cars in the parking lot. Militant rockets cause such superficial damage. IDF rockets are much more powerful and would have caused more damage as well as left a crater. To recap, the rocket attack on Al-Ali Hospital, located in the central part of the Gaza Strip, took place on October 17. According to Palestinian sources, 500 people were reportedly killed. The UN Security Council was supposed to adopt a Russian resolution on a ceasefire in the conflict zone between Israel and Palestine. This would have supposedly helped to avoid a strike on a hospital in the Gaza Strip. This manipulative argument is being circulated by Kremlin propagandists.
I will speak frankly. The time for diplomatic metaphors is long gone. Everybody who did not support our humanitarian resolution with a call for a swift ceasefire must understand that they bear some of the responsibility for what happened. The Brazil draft resolution, unfortunately, will not help to avoid such tragedies from occurring. There is no clear call in it for a ceasefire.
There is no right to commit massacres in international law. Israel is perpetrating massacres in Gaza every single day. For over 10 days now, you have witnessed it, killing entire families, bomb shelters, schools, hospitals, residential buildings, convoys. You have heard it telling people to head south of Gaza and then bomb the south. You have heard and seen it telling people they had a choice between forced displacement and death.
The UN Secretary General condemned the attack on a hospital in the Gaza Strip and called for a humanitarian ceasefire.
I'm fully aware of the deep grievances of the Palestinian people after 56 years of occupation. But as serious as these grievances are, they cannot justify the acts of terror against civilians committed by Hamas on October 7 that I immediately condemned. But those attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Each of my two humanitarian appeals have a value in themselves. They are not bargaining chips, they are simply the right things to do. And I am horrified by the hundreds of people killed at Al-Ahli Hospital this same day in Gaza by a strike that I strongly condemned earlier today. I call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to provide sufficient time and space to help realize my two appeals and to ease the epic human suffering we are witnessing. Too many lives and the fate of the entire region hang on the balance.
The United States vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for a temporary ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas.
The United States is disappointed this resolution made no mention of Israel's rights of self-defense. Like every nation in the world, Israel has the inherent right of self-defense as reflected in Article 51 of the UN Charter. Following previous terrorist attacks by groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
I read Hamas's charter aloud to you just 2 days ago. Hamas's words were not empty threats. Hamas's charter is their action plan. Their goal is the annihilation of Israel. And if Hamas has the opportunity to commit these atrocities again, they will, and you know it. Although there are some here that choose not to designate Hamas as a terror organization for political reasons, it still doesn't change the facts. Hamas deliberately targets civilians and massacres children when given the chance.
The UN Security Council also rejected the Russian draft resolution condemning the escalation of violence in the Middle East, which did not mention the attack by the extremist group Hamas on Israel. Kremlin propagandists tried to portray Russia's UN representative Nebenzia as a peacemaker, but the plan failed. 4 Konotop witches in Ukraine have supposedly performed an initiation rite with a little girl. This fake is being promoted by pro-Russian Telegram channels. Kremlin propagandists routinely attempt to exploit socially vulnerable groups, including children. This time they used an entertainment program from one of the Ukrainian TV channels.
Я хожу на ліпку, а один раз я зліпила танк і мертвого Путіна.
Покажи. Це ти сама придумала?
Так, це я сама придумала. Ось мертвий Путін.
Initiation is an ancient rite that marks a person's transition to a new stage of development within their social group. It is unclear what the girl with the dead Putin figurine has to do with it. According to the New York Times, 500,000 civilians and soldiers have been killed since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. A dead Putin figurine is the least a child can do to express their attitude to the war. I also hope to see Putin dead or at least facing trial in The Hague. Ukraine will definitely win. Good luck.